The Midnight Diner. The mist hung heavy over the streets of Harlem. It was 2 a.m. In a small diner on the corner of Lenox and 126, the world seemed to stand still. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and the feeling of lost hope. Malcolm Pierce sat at the counter, his hands trembling as he gripped his coffee mug. To him, that ceramic cup felt like the only solid thing left in the world. Just hours ago, his life was perfect. He had finished his adaptive learning program, years of hard work, ready for a major federal presentation. Now it was all gone. A corrupted file, a failed backup, and a lifetime of research vanished into thin air. "Let me help you find a way back," a voice said. Malcolm looked up, startled. Standing across the counter was a woman named Renee. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a faded, coffee-stained apron. Her eyes were weary but sharp. They looked right through him. "You look like a man with a heavy mind and nowhere to run," she said calmly. Malcolm let out a dry, tired laugh. "That's actually very accurate." Renee poured him more coffee with a quiet grace, but the silence didn't last long. A sharp voice cut through the room like a blade. "This bill is wrong." At the register stood a man in his 60s, his face flushed red with anger. He was waving his receipt in the air like a weapon. Renee walked over, maintaining her composure. "Is there a problem, sir?" "This sandwich is listed at $6.50, the man barked. "But you charge me $7.25. Are you trying to steal my money?" "I'm sorry, sir," Renee replied, checking the slip. "That's just the sales tax included by the register." "I didn't ask for tax," he shouted. "Fix it now. Don't play dumb with me." "Sir, I don't control the prices." "That's how the system works," she tried to explain. "Thief!" the man muttered under his breath. Malcolm felt the tension in the room rising. Suddenly, Greg, the night manager, stormed out from the back. He was a tall, bitter man with a permanent scowl on his face. "What's the noise about?" Greg demanded. "Your employee is trying to scam me," the customer yelled. Greg turned his glare toward Renee. "Again? Are you overcharging people again?" "No, Greg, it was just the tax." "Shut your mouth." Greg snapped, cutting her off. "I've had 3 complaints about your register this week. You think you're clever? You think I don't see the games you're playing?" "I didn't do anything wrong," Renee whispered. "Oh, you just didn't get caught until now," Greg sneered. "Don't act innocent. I've been in this business for 20 years. I know a hustler when I see one. The hidden genius." The tension in the diner was suffocating. Malcolm watched as the manager, Greg, leaned in close to Renee, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're lucky I don't fire you right now," he sneered. "Who else would hire a single mom with no degree and an attitude like yours?" Renee stood frozen, her eyes a mix of shame and silent rage. Greg wasn't finished. "I'm taking that $7 out of your paycheck to cover this mistake." "No, please." Renee's voice cracked. "I need that money, Greg. My son Jamal's prescription is due Friday. I'm already behind." "Then learn how to do your job," Greg hissed before walking away. The rude customer smirked, tipped his empty cup, and strolled out. The diner went dead silent. Renee returned to the counter, wiping her eyes and trying to force a smile. "Sorry about that. Do you need anything else?" Malcolm looked at her, his jaw tight. "Do you want to sit down for a minute?" She hesitated, then slid onto the stool across from him. The exhaustion on her face was undeniable. "You didn't deserve that," Malcolm said quietly. "It doesn't matter," she sighed. "I have a son who needs his medicine. I don't have the luxury of pride." Silence fell between them. Malcolm stirred his coffee. "I lost everything tonight," he admitted. 3 years of work. 1 corrupted file. It's all gone. Renee looked at him seriously. "Are you sure? Have you tried everything?" "My IT team is out of state." "It's over." Renee's voice dropped to a whisper. "Did you ever make a promise to your kid that you weren't sure you could keep? My son, Jamal, is in special edition. He thinks he's stupid because he can't read like the others. He isn't, but the world keeps punishing him for being different." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "My program, it was designed for kids just like Jamal." "Then maybe you didn't end up in this diner by accident." Renee said. She stood up and nodded toward the back room. Come on, I want to show you something. In the back room, under a single dim bulb, sat a dusty, ancient laptop. It's old, Renee said, but it works. You think we can rebuild 3 years of work in 4 hours? Malcolm asked, skeptical. Let's not waste the first 15 minutes doubting it, she replied, cracking the laptop open. She opened a folder titled Education Tools. Malcolm was stunned. He saw hand-drawn flowcharts, precise, architectural maps of how a dyslexic brain processes language. You made these? Before this cafe, I was a freelance designer for special ed programs, she explained. I built the things the fancy consultants ignored. Renee opened a blank document. All right, CEO, start talking. What was the core of your presentation? Malcolm began to describe Project OpenPath, an AI platform that adapts to how each child learns. I met a girl named Sophie, he recalled. She asked if she'd be stupid forever. I told her no. Renee typed a quote at the top of the slide. Asterisk, I'm not stupid. I just read differently. Sophie, age 8, asterisk. This isn't just a pitch deck, Renee said, her fingers flying across the keys. You're selling redemption for every child the world has written off. By 3:34 a.m., the presentation was coming to life. It wasn't just data anymore. It had a heart. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It was Greg, looking irritated. Renee, why is the side door unlocked? I don't pay you to have TED Talks in the storage room. Malcolm stood up, his face calm but firm. She isn't wasting time, Greg. She's helping me rebuild a federal education program. Greg rolled his eyes. Right, and I'm the next president. I'm serious, Malcolm said, standing his ground. The dawn of a new path. If she wasn't helping me tonight, this program would be dead. Malcolm said firmly. Greg just snorted in disbelief. Well, I guess you're lucky she's such a saint then. He turned and stomped off into the shadows of the back hallway. Renee looked at Malcolm, her lips pressed into a thin line. He doesn't believe a word you're saying. He never has. Then we'll make tomorrow undeniable, Malcolm replied. They went back to work. By 4:10 a.m., they had 28 illustrated pages. Each slide was a masterpiece. Truth made visual, science made human. As Renee sketched the final page, she drew a mother and child sitting at a kitchen table surrounded by crumpled homework. She paused for a moment. This is me and Jamal, she whispered. Every single night. She shaded in the boy's hand, gripping a pencil too tight, and then the mother's hand resting gently on his shoulder. At the bottom, she wrote, asterisk, you're not broken. You're just different. And different is beautiful. Asterisk. Malcolm felt a lump in his throat. At 4:22 a.m., they finally sat back. We did it, he said. No, Renee corrected him softly. We started it. The diner was silent now. The angry customer was long gone, and the regulars had trickled out one by one. Even Greg had disappeared, likely hiding in his office. Renee moved behind the counter, falling back into a rhythm, wiping surfaces, refilling napkins. These were her small rituals of control in a world that gave her none. Malcolm watched her from his stool. The diner felt different now, sacred, almost like something important had been born in the hours before sunrise. You know, Malcolm said quietly, when I walked in here, I was ready to give up. Renee didn't turn around, but her voice was steady. I could tell you had that look. What look? The one that says, I've already lost, but I'm not brave enough to say it out loud yet. Malcolm let out a dry laugh. That's painfully accurate. Do you always say people who come in here like that? Renee finally turned, her eyes softer than before. No, just the ones who actually want to be saved. Malcolm felt a wave of gratitude. This woman, who had been humiliated by her boss and was fighting for every dollar to keep her son healthy, still found the strength to save a stranger, a man who had power and money, but had lost all his hope. Renee, he asked, have you ever thought about going back into education? Full-time, not from the sidelines, but where you belong. Renee blinked. the question hanging in the air as the first light of dawn began to touch the streets of Harlem. The promise. Renee let out a short, quiet laugh. Honey, they don't make room for people like me in boardrooms. I'm not polished. I don't have fancy titles behind my name. I just have a GED and a sketch pad. That sketch pad just saved a $200 million project, Malcolm said, looking her in the eyes. She raised an eyebrow. And yet, I'm still clocking out at $3.25 an hour plus tips. I can change that, Renee. She looked at him squarely, her gaze steady. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't, Malcolm replied firmly. Renee studied him for a long moment, then shook her head with a faint smile. One thing at a time. CEO man, you still have a presentation to make, don't you? Malcolm sighed as the weight of the morning ahead began to settle back into his bones. Yeah, I should go, shower, change, and get across town before the traffic starts. He paused. Do you have a printer here? Renee waved him off. The one here is older than the building and jams every 5 minutes. There's a 24-hour place on 145th and Frederick Douglass. Go there, print everything, make copies, and put them in those fancy folders with the clear covers. It makes it look official. Malcolm stood up slowly, stretching his sore limbs. Are you always as prepared? When you're poor, being prepared is the only way you survive, she said simply. He nodded and reached for the folder, almost reluctant to leave. Are you sure you don't want to speak to someone about how Greg treated you? Renee shook her head. That man has been managing this place for 9 years. I've made peace with the fact that he sees me as expendable. You're not expendable, Malcolm insisted. Tell that to my paycheck, she replied. Malcolm looked down at the sketches in his hands. Pages filled with purpose, stories, and the truth. This isn't the last time we're working together. Renee, that much I can promise you. She didn't reply right away. Then, with a sly smile, she said, Well, then you better go make sure that presentation knocks their socks off. Otherwise, I'll have to find another billionaire to rescue. Malcolm laughed, a real, genuine laugh. He pulled a slim leather card holder from his coat and handed her a card. My direct line. And my private one. If you ever need anything, call me. Renee took the card and glanced at it as the first rays of morning light began to fill the diner. The boardroom revolution. Renee took the card and tucked it carefully into her apron pocket. I'll keep it, she said. But don't wait for me to call. You'll know when you need to. Malcolm stepped toward the door, then paused and looked back. Tell Jamal I said thank you. For what? Renee asked, surprised. For giving you a reason to keep fighting. Renee's eyes glistened as she nodded slowly. You just make sure no kid ever has to ask if they're stupid again. I will, Malcolm promised. He pushed open the door. Outside, the dawn was painting the sky in deep navy and orange. The air was sharp and fresh. For the first time in hours, Malcolm didn't feel like his world was crashing down. Inside the diner, Renee leaned on the counter, staring at the sketches on the screen. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about her next paycheck. She was thinking about Jamal. Malcolm drove through the awakening streets of Manhattan. He had slept less than an hour. His tie was wrinkled, and his eyes were red. But inside, a fire was burning. He pulled into a 24-hour print shop. I need these scanned, printed, and bound, Malcolm told the young clerk. High quality. As many as you can do in 20 minutes. The clerk flipped through the pages, stopping at one of Renee's illustrations of a child reaching for a shelf-labeled success. Whoa, the kid murmured. Who drew these? A friend, Malcolm said. She's brilliant. 10 minutes later, Malcolm walked out with 10 fresh copies in professional clear cover folders. By the time he reached the Education Board headquarters, the city was fully awake. He stepped into the elevator and checked the time, 7:39 a.m. The presentation was at 8 sharp. He entered the glass-walled conference room. 12 board members sat there in crisp suits, their laptops open and coffee steaming. They barely looked up. Malcolm took his seat at the head of the table and placed a bound folder in front of each member. No screens, no slideshows, just paper. He saw them exchange confused looks. At exactly 8, Dr. Evelyn Williams tapped her pen. Mr. Pierce, you may begin. You have 45 minutes. Malcolm stood up and looked him straight in the eye. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I want to start by saying this. I lost the original version of this presentation last night. 3 years of work gone. That got their attention. Every head lifted. But in the process of losing that file, I met someone who reminded me why this project matters. I met a woman named Renee, a waitress in Harlem, and a former special education designer. She has a son, Jamal, who fights his homework every night like at a battle. Malcolm walked to the whiteboard and taped up the first sketch. Asterisk. I'm not stupid. I just read differently. Asterisk. This program, Open Path, is for Jamal. It's for every child who has been made to feel like a failure because their brain doesn't fit the mold. He continued, page by page, story by story. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Laptops were closed. Styluses were set down. For the first time, the board wasn't looking at data. They were looking at a human life. The verdict. The sketches weren't just art. They were mirrors. They reflected both the pain of struggle and the light of potential. One page showed a boy drowning in report cards that read, needs improvement and struggling. The next showed that same boy, now wearing headphones, smiling as his reading levels soared like a thermometer of hope. Another draw depicted a classroom where every desk was identical, except for one, the one labeled Jamal. His desk had wheels, levers, and adaptable parts. Above it, the caption read, Equality is giving every child the same desk. Equity is giving every child the right desk. By the time Malcolm reached the final page, the sketch of the kitchen table, his voice was thick with emotion. This is Renee and her son. They sit like this every night. She told me he cries because he thinks he's broken, but he's not. None of them are. They just need us to meet them where they are. A deep, heavy silence filled the room. Dr. Williams cleared her throat. Mr. Pierce, this is not at all what I was expecting. It's not what I planned either, Malcolm admitted, but it's the truth. Another board member leaned forward. Who is this Renee? Is she available for hire? A wave of genuine, warm laughter rippled through the room. Dr. Williams smiled. I've been on this board for 18 years. I've seen every pitch and every shiny new tool. Most of them forget that behind every statistic is a child who is tired, confused, and hurting. She held up the final page. This reminds us who we actually serve. Thank you for losing your file, Mr. Pierce. And thank you for finding Renee. The room remained hushed for a moment longer, as if the air itself had become sacred. Then came the familiar sound of reality, the shuffling of papers and the tapping of pens. But the distance between the board and the presenter had vanished. Let's open the floor for questions, Dr. Williams said softly. A silver-haired man to Malcolm's right spoke up. Do you have the data to support these claims? Yes, sir, Malcolm replied confidently. Our pilot program showed that reading comprehension rose by 38% in 6 months. But more importantly, engagement tripled. Kids who use a hide from books are now finishing stories for the first time. He handed out one final page. It had graphs, but next to each bar was a quote from a child. Asterisk, I didn't cry during homework this week. I read to my little brother, and he actually listened. I got my first gold star. Asterisk, a woman known for her skepticism flipped through the pages. These sketches are unorthodox. We're used to high-tech digital displays. But I'll admit, she paused, a small smile appearing, I'll remember these more than anything I've seen in months. I didn't come here to be impressive today, Malcolm said. I came to be understood. And who owns the rights to these images? Another member asked. Malcolm didn't hesitate for a second. Renee Walker does. These are her drawings. This is her voice as much as mine. Nods of approval went around the table. Dr. Williams tapped her pen gently on the desk. Let's do this. The new beginning. The vote was unanimous. The board didn't just approve the project. They fast-tracked it with double the original budget. But as Malcolm walked out of the glass building into the bright morning sun, he didn't head to a celebration or a luxury restaurant. He drove straight back to Harlem. The diner was quiet now, The breakfast rush over. Renee was behind the counter, looking exhausted as she wiped down the same spot for the 100th time. When she saw Malcolm, she stopped. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the answer. Malcolm didn't say a word. He simply placed one of the professional, bound folders on the counter. On the front cover, below the title project open path, it now read, Lead Creative Consultant, Renee Walker. They didn't just like it, Renee, Malcolm said, his voice steady. They realized they couldn't do it without you. That contract on the last page is an offer for a full-time position, a real salary, benefits, and a specialized school placement for Jamal. Renee's hands trembled as she opened the folder. She saw her own sketches, the ones Greg had called games, now treated like sacred blueprints for the future of education. A tear fell onto the page, right next to the drawing of her and Jamal. Just then, Greg walked out from the back, ready to bark another order. Renee, why are you standing around? Those tables won't. Malcolm turned to him, his presence filling the small diner. Actually, Greg, she's finished. Renee is resigning, effective immediately. She has a boardroom waiting for her. Greg looked at the folder, then at Malcolm's expensive suit, and finally at Renee. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Renee took off her faded apron and laid it on the counter. She looked at the diner, the place that had seen her lowest moments, and then she looked at Malcolm. I told you I'd have to find another billionaire to rescue, she joked, though her voice was thick with emotion. You didn't just rescue a billionaire, Renee, Malcolm replied, smiling. You rescued the future for thousands of kids who thought they were broken. As they walked out together, the Harlem sun was high and warm. Malcolm realized that losing his data was the best thing that ever happened to him. Because sometimes the universe has to burn down your old plans just to show you a path you never knew existed. A path that leads you exactly where you're meant to be.